Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is GENIX-JS, a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching you need to know to get started with front-end web development. We've been talking about JavaScript in our last two videos in this series. So we're going to be looking at functions in JavaScript. Alright, so I'm still using the same folder to keep all the code organized so that you can easily refer to it and learn. So I'm not going to be doing much here. We're just going to create a new folder and name this 03-functions, right? So as usual, create your index.html file and don't waste your time typing boilerplate. Just use exclamation and click on tab. All right, so now you name these functions in JavaScript. All right, so now let me explain why we are treating these concepts. All right, so for you to understand programming, especially as a web developer, you have to have a solid background in JavaScript. I mean, you don't need to know everything, but this that I'm exposing to us is actually what is needed to be a successful web developer or a front-end developer, as the case might be. So let's just stay tuned as I continue to make these videos, and yeah, we'll learn more. So I'm just going to link this to script.js and then create my JavaScript file for this particular folder. So type script.js and then here we have a JavaScript and then it's linked. So as usual, I used to use a simple console.log to show that it's working. So you can just say JavaScript linked, right? And then let's run this with live server. So I right click on this and then click on open with live server, and then I can right click on this and then inspect as usual. So we don't have anything in our HTML. Go to console, you can see JavaScript linked. Let's reload again. You can see JavaScript linked on the first line. So I'm going to be cancelling everything opened and then open this again, right? So let's put a simple h1. So actually we're going to be creating a simple, I'll say, HTML form in this one to emphasize functions, right? So let's call this h1 functions in JavaScript. All right, this is it, functions in JavaScript linked. So what's a function, right? A function is basically a line of statements, a line of code or a piece of code that when executed performs a specific task. We have different types of functions in JavaScript. We have functions that accept parameters, which we discussed in the contact form series. We'll be discussing it extensively. This video is dedicated to functions in the first part. We have functions that return no value. We have functions that return values, and we have functions that return values and accept parameters. So now let's just define a simple function. So an example of a function, if we look at our index.html, we spoke of in the first video. We talked about JavaScript, inline JavaScript, and then you saw me doing something like this on click, and then you saw me doing something like this alert. Okay, let me put this in a double quote, reinforcing our string learning. You can put h1 click. So I'm doing something like this in the last video, that when you click on this, it gives us this. Why? Because this is actually a JavaScript function, and this function is known as an event listener, which we looked at in our contact form series. I would advise you go and watch the contact form series and just follow through to have a brief understanding of all this that we're talking about here. So this video we're building on what we've learned from the last. All right, so now this an on click event. This is a function basically that performs this task of alerting that the h1 has been clicked. So now let's come to this place and create a simple function. So to create a function, there's a keyword in JavaScript known as function. Now this function is actually used to create a function basically that would perform our task. So let's create a function that changes the background color of our web page. So to do that, we can say change background. So your function name must always be in context what that function is doing. So this function is not accepting any parameter, right? So this place is used to define all the kind of parameters that the function will accept. All right, so I'm just going to open this, and then yeah, here we have it. So to change our background, we don't need to select any element here as we did in contact form series. We can just change it directly. Since it's linked already to the HTML document, we can just access the document. I'm still going to talk about document object model in videos to come, but we can just accept the document, and then we can document the body, right? Because if you look at it very well, everything here is inside the body, and this is the body, right? Document the body dot style dot background color, right? Just follow me. Background color, let's change it to blue, right? Nothing happens yet, right? Nothing happens yet. That's because we've not initialized, we've not executed our function. So this is known as function declaration. Function declaration. Basically, this is how you declare a function in JavaScript. You have the function keyword, which shows that it's a function, the function name, and then you have the function container that contains the parameter, if there's any, which is passed as an argument when you execute the function. We'll be looking at that in depth. And then you have the function block. You can also put a comment, changes the background of what the function does, changes the background of the web page. All right, so to run this function now, we're going to say change background color. So now we are running this function. You can see that it changes the background color to blue. All right, change the background color to blue. Let's change the color, that's the color of every element, to white, so that it will not clash. So this is a function that just performs an action. It is not taking in any value, and it is not returning any value. So that's a very simple function. This function at basics dot color, we give it something like white, right? White. All right, so now this is basically function in JavaScript, right? We've performed this action by changing our background color. So we can name this function that only performs an action, right? So it doesn't return a value, it doesn't take in any value. So now this second type of function, which will lead us to create our form, is function that takes in a value and performs an action. Takes in a value and performs an action. So basically this type of function. So let's create this function. So we'll say function. So basically we're creating a form that will calculate the age of a user. So we're going to be reinforcing. So this series is going to be very practical. We're not just going to be learning the concepts. We're now going into the stage where we start to build mini projects, and then by the end of this series you should have like 10 projects, mini projects that you can say, okay, I've built, and I can combine everything together to build something bigger, which we'll be doing at the end of this series, which is our contact e-commerce platform for marketers and people that want to buy and sell. So now to create that, so I can just put something like an age calculator, right? So this basically what this age calculator is going to do is going to calculate the age of users after 10 years, right? After 10 years. We're going to be creating a simple function that does this for us, that calculates the age of users after 10 years. All right, so let's just save this and save this script file. So we're creating our function already. So this is an example of a function that takes in a value and performs an action. So what type of function are we going to define here? So we're going to define a function that let's just say actually we'll define two functions. The first function is going to be the one that takes in the input. So take users input, right? That's what this function is going to do. So now obviously this function is going to have a parameter. Now a parameter is basically a variable that is defined in a function, a variable that is defined to be accepted when the function is being called. So we're going to call this user age, right? So that's what this particular function is going to do. Actually, instead of take user inputs, we'll just have one function. So calculate user age. All right, so this function, according to this HTML file, age calculator that calculates the age of users after 10 years. So we're going to take in the user's date of birth, not age, because now when you're writing JavaScript, always think logically, right? Don't just write, don't start writing code without thinking about your code. So You say I made a mistake and now I have to be retyping and retyping. So make sure you think, okay, I want to perform this action. What are the things that are needed? What are the variables that are needed? What is the logic that is behind this? So obviously, for us to get the age of users after 10 years, we don't need to know the user's age. They should just enter their date of birth, and then we can calculate it based off the current year, plus 10, and then we can get their age based off that. So it's going to be very straightforward. So we can put user's date of birth or user's year of birth, not date of birth. We only need the year. Alright, so now this function takes in the year of birth of each user that imputes their years, right, and returns their ages after 10 years. Alright, so the name is calculate user's age, right? It's not so straightforward, but we now have this explanation to explain this for us properly. So now for us to do this, we can say return. Okay, return. So now this performs an action, right? It's not returning a value. So let's just say, since it's performing an action, we can store it in a variable. Okay, since inside the scope variable, what type of variable declaration are we going to use? That's right, var. So now var user age after 10 years. All right, user age after 10 years is equal to, so I'm going to calculate user year of birth, right? The first thing we need to do is actually get the user's age, from their year of birth. So we say the current year, so let's just put 2024 minus the user year of birth. All right, so that's the user's birth, which is going to give us actually a number, but it's looking at it as you can see a number, right? Because a number is associated with it, and this one is giving us any. That means it doesn't know the data type. But let's continue. So user's age after 10 years is going to be the user age that we get. So we don't need this variable. Actually, we can just return this value, but since this function doesn't return a value, it's just calculating it, we'll just console.log it. So we can just say console.log and then user age plus 10. All right, so there's a very important concept I'm going to be explaining after we run this function. So let's calculate the user's age, right? Running the function with different users' ages, users' years of birth, running the function with different user years of birth. So the first one, you can say calculate age, say 1990, another one, let's say 2000, another one, let's say 2002, another one, let's say 2006, another one 2009. All right, calculate age 2009. We started doing some math in JavaScript. All right, we're going to be talking about JavaScript inbuilt functions and objects. All right, so now if we save that and we reload this, you can see that it's giving us our ages, right? The user that is born in 1990, 10 years from now will be 44 years. The one that is born in 2000, 10 years from now will be 24 years. The one that is born in 2002, 10 years from now will be 32 years, and the one that is born 2006, 28, and so on and so forth. So that's basically that about that as regards using functions that only take in a value and perform an action. So now look at it very well. In this place, I defined a variable, a function, and then the variable that the function was going to accept was user's year of birth, which is the parameter. And here we're passing in our parameter. So when a function is being called, and if you are passing in a parameter when the function is being called, it's called an argument. So let's put it parameter passed into a function during the function execution, passed into a function during execution is known as an argument. Why variable, put variable declared in a function during its declaration, that's the function's declaration, is known as a parameter, right? So it is needed when you are passing it to an argument. Imagine if I didn't put anything here, it's going to give us an error. You can see, okay, it didn't give us an error, it just gave us any n. That means not a number. We'll be explaining this as we go on. So let's continue. So now the third type of function is function that doesn't accept any parameter but returns a value. So function that does not accept or take in a parameter but returns a value, all right. So this type of function basically, so pay attention here. When you're dealing with functions, you should always consider what type of function you want to use before writing any code. So we've already created this in this place, an H calculator. So this one is very straightforward. Let's just a function that will just for example calculate the area of triangle of a fixed set. So what I mean is function calculates area of triangle, right? Area of triangle, or let's calculate area of rectangle, right? That's much more easier. All right, so this is not taking in any parameter, right? You can just say return, or let's just give it var. The length, we give the length a fixed size, fixed because we are not accepting any dynamic value from the user when we run the function. And var, we have breadth, let's say 200, and then we have, okay, we can just return length times breadth, and then to give us the value. So this is the return value, length times breadth, which is a number. And then if we calculate the area without passing in any arguments, because it will not define any parameter, to give us the area, calculate area of rectangle, return length times breadth. Okay, we calculate area of rectangle. Okay, it gives us 60. Okay, we have to console.log the value. All right, so now when you return a value from a function, to see the function value on the console, you have to actually explicitly console.log it. And this is because when a function is run, if it returns a value, that value is only to be stored as a variable. If you want to see the value, you have to console.log it. So you can actually store this in a variable. So to see the function value, you have to store it as a variable, or you can console.log it explicitly, right? So that's all. So we can store this in a variable. We can say const area of triangle, right? Area of triangle, and then we can console.log this. So you make sure that you actually execute the function when you are saving it in the variable. If not, nothing will happen. Look, if I cancel this and I just say console.log area of triangle, look at what it will give us. You can see it's giving us the function declaration instead of the function execution. So to execute the function, just put that parentheses there, and then when you run, it gives us 60,000 as earlier. So that's that about the three types of function. There's one more, the one that accepts values as arguments and returns values. So let's go on before we go into more advanced function types, and we can call this video a wrap. So now let's look at this. So function that accepts a parameter as an argument, right? As an argument, as I explained, and returns a value. So I want you to note something down. Put here a note. A function can either return only a value or return no value at all. right? You can't return more than one value, right? And that return is basically what kills the function, right? That's basically what terminates the function. Once you have return, that is the end of the function, that is the end of the scope. So we have languages like C++ that we have something like return 0. C++ main function is a function that runs the whole program. So as you return a value, you are killing that particular program, right? You're terminating, you're saying that's the end. So a function is ended by a return value, and if you don't have a return value, then it's ended by whatever action that you have defined in it. Let me just reinforce that here. So let me increase the size of this code editor. All right, and then leave this console here. So a function can either only return a value, can either return only a value or no value at all, right? And then once you run a function, the function is terminated, or it is terminated, thus it is ended. I'll put ended only after the program, or only after the action has been performed or a value has been returned, or both, right? So even the function returning a value is still an action because it is returning something back. So that's what function is. And you can see that even our JavaScript code is some sort of a function because we are returning this globally, we are returning this also. So basically anything that returns a value is known as a function, right? So the next thing that we're going to do now is to talk about functions that accepts a parameter and returns a value. So an example of that, we can say function describe human. So this function basically takes in a human object. We're going to be reinforcing what we learned from the last video, data structures. So human, in this human, okay, this function takes in a human object and returns a string describing the human. So basically this function, what it's just going to do is going to return all right, so let's just use this particular string template literal. So basically this is a new feature in JavaScript. I said we're going to be looking at string methods. So string methods, basically methods, functions that can be performed on a string to manipulate the string, right? And part of string methods, we have string dot splice, string dot, all those kind of string methods we'll be looking at in depth, actually not in this video. Sorry, not in this video. I want us to focus on functions, and then we can go on later to talk about those are not really the main things when you are writing programs. You only use them when you need to, but these are the basics that we're dealing with here. So return, so we're going to say this dot, okay, I'm going to explain this in a bit, right? Return this dot human dot the name is this dot human. I will explain this after I write it down. Human dot what am I doing? It's not this dot human. Okay, human dot age. Human dot is age years old. All right, so this is a simple function. Basically takes in a value or a parameter and then returns a value as well. So let's define our human object, right? All right, so let's say const, let's use man, the same one we used last time. So we're going to give it name, as you can see here, name, give it John, and then we'll give it age 25. All right, so now let's now call our function. So describe human, and then we can put in man as the parameter. So it doesn't have to be the same name as long as you pass it in that same position. All right, it's going to be defined. So remember I said you have to, before you can view the value of a function, you have to store it in a variable. So we're going to store it in a constant variable and call this the first human. and then we're going to console.log the first human, and then you see it return John is 25 years old, right? So first human, you can see John is 25 years old. So that's that about the types of functions that we have on a basic level. So now let's look at more advanced functions, right? So we have what we call higher order functions. Higher order functions, right? So higher order functions are basically functions that take in functions as parameters or and return functions as values. Now this is a very complex function, and in JavaScript frameworks like React, you make a lot of use with higher order functions. You make use of higher order functions a lot. So it's very important to have a basic understanding of what these functions mean and what they do. So now let's look at higher order functions in depth. So for example, I have a function, and this function basically calculates, okay, instead of calculating, this function basically prints error message, right? So this function takes in, for example, let's say it takes in a particular action if successful or not. So let's say that this function takes in login function, right? So now basically this function is taking in login function, right? So we're going to put our condition. We've not spoken about condition, but just let us do this. This is quite complex, but I'll break it down. So we have something like if login function. So put this in parentheses. If login function is equal to true. So this is all this is going to happen from the login function, but we are using it in the print error message. Then we return success. That's if whatever happens in the login function is equal to true, we're returning success. Else, let's return error, right? Which is what this function does, printing error message, right? For printing error message. So we're going to return error, user not logged in, user not logged in. For this, we're going to put success, user logged in. So this is just a mock-up or just an example of how the real world programming looks like, even if it's not directly the way it looks, but just to explain higher order functions. So imagine if I actually call this function and I pass in something like true instead of a function, right? So let's call it out. Let's first store it in a variable. So we're going to call this higher order function 1. Let's store it in a let higher order function 1. Higher order function 1 is equal to print error message, and then we pass in true to give us success, user logged in. You'll be console.log it. But this is not what we want to do. We want to pass in a function instead of a value, right? This is not what we want, right? Even if it's giving us the success, we want to get error. So now let me comment this out. So this is not what we want to do. You don't use higher order functions like this. You don't pass in values in higher order functions. No. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to create this login function, right? So to create it, I'm going to put function. I'm going to give it the same name. Doesn't matter. But I'll give it login function, right? And then after giving it login function, I'm actually going to create a variable. I will initialize a variable that holds the value of true or false if the user is logged in. So I'm going to say let is logged in. So that's it. Remember when I talked of initializing a variable, this has a value of undefined currently, right? See, it's declared, but its value is never read. So it has a value of undefined. So now that's that about that. So what we want to do now is we want to return is logged in based on a certain condition, right? So let's say if okay, let's just use a very simple and unrealistic stuff. We'll say if 2 is greater than 1, obviously. If 2 is greater than 1, right? If 2 is greater than 1, then let the user is logged in. We'll just say is logged in is equal to true. else is logged in is equal to false. So now we've actually solved that, and then we can now return is logged in, right? The reason why we're returning is logged in is because this is a function. This is a function, and that's to return that particular value. And we can actually use this function if we don't call it and declare, if we don't execute it in the higher order function that we are looking at. So I'm sorry this is becoming complex already, but just a brief explanation. I might still do another video to cover higher order functions, and we have another type, callback functions, in depth. So now we have print error message and we have login function. So we want to call this, we actually need to call login function, right? We actually need to call login function, and now we can now calling it is going to execute this particular function and give us what we want based off this. So it's still the same thing, right? It's just that we are not doing everything that this success user is logged in, the same thing as saying is logged in. This one is the same thing as saying this, but we want to print the message. We have a separate function that handles the message. We have a function that handles the condition that we handle the message. So that's, it's like two functions coming together, right? We're returning a value, but we're passing in a function. We're going to look at the one that will be passing a value and return a function, right? So let's continue. So we can say let's for example, let's say let's just put user status, right? Since it's going to be returning any of this, let it be equal to print error message, and then inside here we can say login function, right? So now we are passing login function. We don't need to call login function as we pass it in here. No, we don't need to do that. You can see login function is not a function. We don't need to do that. All we need to do is just pass it like this, and then after passing it like this, we can just leave it like that, and everything will be handled in our program, right? Everything is being handled here, right? Because this is where we are. So whatever is passed into this function will be called when this condition is run, and whatever is called here will give us any of this based on the condition. Obviously, we know that this is going to give us true, right? So if it gives us true, we're obviously going to be getting this. Imagine if I tweak it. Let's see what it gives us now. If we console.log the user status, we're going to get this, right? All right, mission accomplished. We got what we wanted. If I actually did the other way around, if 2 is less than 1, obviously it's going to give us false. Error, user not logged in. So basically this is higher order function, mixing a function, passing a function as an argument, and then initializing it or executing it in that particular function that you passed it into to give a certain value. So the other type of higher order function is returning a function as a value, but passing a value as the argument. So that is also very, very easy. So let's just create another higher order function, right? So we'll say returning, we'll say functions that return functions as values, functions that return function as values, right? In brackets, higher order functions, higher order functions. They're higher order because they don't just deal with single values, they deal with functions themselves. So let's just change this back because 2 is not less than 1, 2 is greater than 1. All right. So it's going to give us that success is logged in. All right, so let's give a more realistic example for this higher order function. All right, so okay, now I want to calculate the amount of time a student came to class and print or run a function that determines if that student is eligible to write exam or not. All right, so this is how you think as a programmer. Just find a real world example and practice on it, just based on the basics that you've learned so far in functions. Okay, so now let's do that real quick. So let's put a note, function that returns a function that calculates, that determines if a student is eligible to write the sessions exam based on a certain number of attendance, based on a required number of attendance, of class attendance, right? So this is what the function is going to do. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a function that determines if the student is eligible, right? So we're going to say function, and then we're going to say determine.
The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
So we're going to say function, and then we're going to say determine students eligibility, right? So basically, this student eligibility is a function that will take in a this function is going to take in a particular value. It's going to take in the number of times, number of classes attended by the students, right? So this is what this function is going to take, which is a number, right? That's a number, and then we have a certain number of times that the students must attend class. So if it is less than that, then we're going to return the user is not eligible. If it is more than that, we're going to return that the user is eligible. If it is exactly that, we're also going to return that the user is eligible. So I'm going to say let eligibility we'll say eligibility value, that's the number of times. We'll say 70 times. The student must have attended at least 70 of 100 classes, right? Must have attended at least 70 out of 100 classes. All right, just a simple way to view things. Now, they must have attended at least 70 of 100 classes. And now we're going to say if. So we're making use of if statements here. We're going to look at control structures as well, coming videos. So if the number of class attended, that's the students, is less than the eligibility value, then we're going to return that
the Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
Then we're going to return that the user is not eligible, or the student is not eligible to write the sessions exam, right? So now you get the idea. Probably we've been skipping classes, and then you see that on the portal you're not eligible. This is how it is done actually. So else we can return. We don't need to put the condition again, because obviously the opposite of it is going to be that the number of classes is greater than. But since we actually want it to be greater than or equal to, this is what we do. Else if number of classes is greater than or equal to. So we're going to be talking about operators. That's a very basic fundamental concept in JavaScript. I'm sorry I'm skipping some concepts. I'm actually reinforcing based on the contact form series. I'll be talking about these things in depth also. So this series is going to be exciting. So is greater than or equal to the eligibility value, right? Then let it return that. And then that's that about that. So now we have a function. So this is determining the student eligibility. So we want to actually print out the student's status, right? So we have another function that does that for us. What this function does, the function just prints out the student's status. So this function is going to return this one. I know it's not really necessary, but I feel it is actually needed. So just to explain functions that return other functions as values. So you can say function, we say return student status, or return student eligibility, right? Or let's just say that this function would return the student eligibility if the student has paid the school fees. So just trying to make it more realistic. If the student has paid his or her school fees completely, let's put completely. All right, so now that's that. So we don't need to put any number of classes. We don't need to put. We'll just say let's has paid school fees. Obviously this is going to be a boolean. So this we're going to put false just to get our, so these are static values. In the real world, you'll be having more of dynamic values. You even be storing data to the database. You'll be using servers. You will not be focusing on just writing JavaScript. You'll be doing more than that. So let's as page school fees be equal to false, and then we can now say we can now run the function, right? So we can say if as page school fees is equal to true, which is not true. Let's just put it there. Then if as page school fees is equal to true, we're going to return the student eligibility. Now we want to check. Now the student has paid the school fees, right? Then we can actually return the eligibility. If the student has not, if else, we'll just say sorry, we can't. We'll just put return sorry, we can't return your eligibility status. Sorry, we can't return your eligibility status, right? All right, so that's that about that as regards IRA function. So let's just quickly do this. If the student has paid the school fees, let's put in. Now mind you, this condition does not have anything to do with this condition. This condition is going to run based on what value that we put inside this particular function. So we're running this function, right? We're running determine student eligibility, not return. Determine student eligibility, and then okay, determine student eligibility, and then wait, this function takes in a value. Okay, it returns as values. Okay, it doesn't take in a value, it just returns functions as values. All right, so let's continue. So we can put 80. So basically, what is this going to give us? Obviously, it's going to give us this, right? It's going to give us the student is eligible to write the exam. Let's check that out. So let's say something like const, let's say male student. Remember, I was storing the function variable, the function's value. We can say return student eligibility, and then we're going to get the console.log the male student or male student status. Male student status. We're going to get sorry, we can't return your eligibility status. Why? Because the student has not paid the school fees, right? But imagine if this was true, which is going to return that the student is eligible to write. Undefined. Okay, it's giving us undefined. Let's look at why. Okay, it's giving us undefined because there's nothing that we're returning here. Right? So we can just say return this. Let's see. Good. So we're returning the value that was returned here, right? So to break everything down, I just want you to know that other functions are going to be used as we go on. So just take your time to wrap your head around this. It is not so complex. I would actually treat it again as we go on, but this is just a brief introduction to this complex. You don't need to understand everything about it, you just need to have an idea, and just know that other functions are functions that can be passed in as arguments and can be returned as values in other functions. So thank you very much for staying to the end of this video. There are some things I didn't cover up in this video, but for the simplicity of this video, I focused mainly on functions, right? So that's the first part of this video. The second part of this video is going to be the next particular fourth video where we'll be talking about string methods, we're talking about numbers methods, we're talking about strongly typed, loosely typed, dynamically typed language. And I said I was going to give you the design, show you the design of the e-commerce project that we're going to be building at the end of this JavaScript series. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe.